I want everybody who thinks language ideologies is a jargony term to realize it's a very simple one. It means ideas about language. And Boas actually talked about this. Folk ideas, he called them folk typologies of language. And Boas thought they were useless. They weren't really that important. Who cares what people think about language? It was really Michael Silverstein, late 1970s, who started to return to this. And that's because when we think of language change, generally, linguists will take the approach of genetic linguistics. And you may have heard of genetic linguistics before. It's where you compare different languages and then try to reconstruct how humans move through space and time. And it's not unlike doing the mathematical work on comparisons of human DNA structure. Okay, you're looking at certain relationships and you're understanding that certain things like genetics, but also linguistics change naturally through time. Silverstein in the 70s said, yeah, except that that's not how language actually changes, is it? Language changes because there's a new pop song, or language changes because something's just not cool. Language changes because somebody gives a speech on TV and everybody sees it and they start doing it, right? How do we understand this, right? How do you understand a colonial power like France going into West Africa and making people stop speaking their language and learn French? That's not, right? That's not a natural, slow process. That's a process that's based on language ideologies. Okay, so ideas about language, saying that this is a good language or this is a bad language. This is a cool language. This is a low status language. This is a regressive language, whereas this is a language of resistance. All right, these are the ideas. This is what we mean here with language ideologies. And then this plays out on the interpersonal level. And this is where I wanted to try to bring this back to make this useful in the sense that it's really not that abstract. This is probably the least abstract thing I can think of in all of anthropological theory. Okay, so we deal with this every day, and it's always intersectional. So I want to come back to race and ethnicity here. I talked about gender, but honestly, I don't know that you can talk about gender without talking about race, or vice versa. You know, you talk about women, it's like, are you talking about old women, young women, white women, black women, Hispanic women? Like what women, right? Women are never just women, just like people of a certain race are never just people of a certain race. So we have to look at these things and how they intersect. But to just talk about race, because everyone in this department, our anthropology department is probably an expert on this, but we do know, we talk about this a lot, right? Race is a biological myth, it's a cultural construct, it's a social reality. And I recommend everyone take Dr. Madrigal's class so that you can discuss gravelly and more reading on how race can become, right, a biological reality, especially for certain medical issues. What I want to say here from linguistic anthropology is, okay, it's also a linguistic reality. And when we think especially about the social construction and the social reality side to race, right? People often say, if it's a social construct, can't we just deconstruct it? And then people will say, but no, we always see race, right? We can't just pretend it doesn't exist. What we often miss is the way that we reproduce race and the way that we can also deconstruct race. The way that racial structures and ethnic structures and power structures like this change is often through language. It's reproduced through language, and it's also resisted through language. And that's what you get from a lot of this linguistic anthropology. And I'm going to try to give you some more examples here. Attitudes, right? So language ideologies. Language ideologies are rooted very much in attitude. When people speak, they speak with attitude, okay? If there's one thing, actually, I should have said this before. A simple definition of language for a linguistic anthropologist is taking social action. Right? Now that's an interesting definition, another sort of, you almost say a cop-out definition, but language is taking social action. But yes, that's what a linguistic anthropologist would say, because our language is never neutral. It always has attitude, right? We can pretend that there is not any power involved in the language we use, but that's nonsense, right? It's like pretending that we don't see race, right? Language is never just neutral. There's always power at play, and we have to be aware of these things, right? So language ideologies, always rooted in power. Which language are you speaking? What accent are you speaking in? How might people understand the way that you are using language, even as simple as the font that you're using on your PowerPoint presentation, right, is saying something, right? Or that at least somebody can interpret. Okay, so attitudes. The other part of this, right? Look at multilingual situations. Language ideologies are always there in multilingual situations where you're choosing which language do we speak, which is the high status language. When I talk to this person, which is the most appropriate language to speak for them? If I speak the wrong language in the wrong way, might I offend someone? What this is really about, all right, is about attitudes about language and power dynamics associated with how we think about language in society. And you can go through a lot of these. Obviously, language ideologies are rooted in speech communities. I can give you some really great work. Marcelina Morgan has done a lot of work on hip hop speech communities, international hip hop speech communities, even when people don't speak the same language, like French versus English versus Spanish. they can still get together and participate in the same speech community, right? Which is an attitudinal community. It's quite interesting. So these are fundamentally about identity. They're fundamentally about performance. And then the last little example I'll give, if anybody really wants to look up Jane Hill, Jane Hill's work on mock Spanish is fantastic. Mock Spanish, profanity, comedy are often really fair game, as are our memes when you're talking about linguistic anthropology, because it's often through these types of language that we're playing with power, okay? And so mock language in particular can appear at times, like, you know, you're mocking someone. The question is, are you actually resisting a power structure, or are you reproducing a power structure? And sometimes, and if you read Jane Hill, you're doing both at the same time. And it's this awareness that we need to develop a bit more. In other words, what are the actual impacts of the words that we say, not just on the people that we're speaking to, but on the larger social structures in society?